Coming up, the struggle for equality in Iraq and beyond.
Well, women in the Middle East right now are the battlefield for a political fight, a fight that is in your face. This is not, a symbolic fight. It's actually a very real fight.
Women for Women International founder Zainab Salbi discusses growing up around Saddam Hussein and the fight for gender rights in the Middle East. It's just ahead on Global Ethics Forum.
Zainab Salbi has dedicated her career to ensuring that the voices of women survivors of war are heard here in the United States and around the world. As the founder of Women for Women International, she's helped 370,000 women living in conflict zones develop the skills and resources needed to take back control of their lives. Zainab Salbi is also the author of 3 books: the best-selling memoir, Between Two Worlds, Escape from Tyranny, Growing Up in the Shadow of Saddam, The Other Side of War, Women's Stories of Survival and Hope, and her latest release, If You Knew Me, You Would Care. I would like to begin with your latest field trip to Iraq. Can you tell us how are the women you spoke with faring today, 10 years after the invasion of Iraq?
Not so good, and I think everyone in Iraq would agree on that. But also it's a complicated story. Women have gained political positions much more than they ever had before. They are guaranteed 25% of the parliament's seats, and they are now about 33% of the Iraqi parliaments. Having said that, there is no real political will on the political side to formally and really engage women in the political landscape of Iraq. But that's not the story of what Iraqi women are going through. Socially and economically, women have regressed to a great extent. I grew up in an Iraq where women were working in the 70s and the 80s. My aunt was a manager of a factory, a leader of a factory rather. My mom was a teacher, my other aunt was a principal, the other aunt is a lawyer. I grew up with working women who went on vacations to Europe, and they were middle-class women, not only upper middle-class women, but worked. And that was an era where women all worked. Right now, it is rare to see women in the workplace. Very, very rare. Most women have regressed back economically. And when you interview women, they are very depressed, actually. And they talk about how before, in Saddam's time, they were afraid of Saddam and his sons, who were notorious for their violence against women. And as one woman said, today we're afraid of everyone. Mm-hmm. Every day we leave the street, we're afraid who's gonna attack us as a woman today. So sexual harassment in the workplace, in the streets, increase of violence against women. No legal treatment of women is no longer equal. It's now up to every state, every province, every religious clerk to interpret the law vis-a-vis women in terms of divorce and marriage and custody and all of these things. Before, we used to have a federal law that guaranteed all Iraqi women the same treatment. Now every woman gets treated differently based on her religion and in the area she is living in. So overall, it's actually not a good story for women.
Is that the story that you see elsewhere throughout the Middle East?
Well, women in the Middle East right now are the battlefield for a political fight, a fight that is in your face. This is not, a symbolic fight. It's actually a very real fight in the Middle East between two sides, between the Islamists who believe that religion is to regulate our daily life. God is in the relationship between all of us. And between not secularists, there is no one in the Middle East call themselves secularists, rarely, and the word does not exist in Arabic anyway, but what they refer to also as modernists, who are also saying we are Muslims and saying and practicing Muslims, pray, fast, all of that, but that the relationship between the individual and God is a private relationship as opposed to a relationship that regulates the society on a daily basis and the legal system and all of that. Now, in that fight, and it's not men against women, it is women and men here and women and men there, women are the battlefield. Who controls women? What should they wear? How can they be married? Can they be a president or not? Can they go to school or not? Can they be in a polygamous marriages or not? A marriage? Who controls the mobility and the look of women is the most critical discussion in the Middle East right now. One of the most essential reasons for the economic growth of Europe and America, of Western Europe and America, is the inclusion of women in the market space, according to the Economist Intelligence Unit. And if the emerging market is to actually grow at the same rate that the Western market has grown, they need to incorporate women in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And to incorporate women in the marketplace in terms of work, as a workforce, you need to make sure that they are safe, safe from violence, at least reducing of the violence, reduction of the violence. There is a legal retribution. They are getting education. They're getting access to health care. They're getting access to economic opportunities. You can't talk about a growth of a country, as one Iraqi sheikh actually told me, when one of the country's wings is broken or not used. A bird cannot fly if one of its wings is broken.
I'd like to move back a little bit now and talk about your own story. You were, of course, born and raised in Baghdad under the watchful eyes, actually, of the Ba'athist regime. And yet, as you just described, you said that growing up in Iraq was, at the time, very much like growing up in an American suburb. That changed for you when your father became the pilot of Saddam Hussein. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I mean, Saddam was like a fog of fear in our lives. My family happened to see the fog at a closer level, at a closer range. But the fear in Saddam's era was like fog. You cannot touch it, but it's always surrounding you, and you cannot breathe through it. But it's there. I don't know how to describe it, but everyone knows what fog is. And that was how fear was. And so it was. And in my particular case, that fear was very real, but we were in between two places. And the people saw us as close to Saddam's family, entourage, and Saddam's family saw us as part of the people. And both were suspicious of us. I remember growing up when my father became Saddam's pilot. First of all, my identity was erased. All of our identities were erased at the individual. And as a matter of fact, it was my biggest leap of faith to write my memoir and sort of tell my truth. It was the only way that I could liberate myself from that fear. And that fear I held on until 6 years ago, until I wrote the book. My fear was that if I tell you that I knew Saddam Hussein, my actual face would disappear, and all what you would see is his identity and his face, because he's so much stronger than I am, and because I grew up with everything about me was related to Saddam. My house was referred to the house of Saddam Hussein's pilot. Everything was related to that. So everyone else was afraid of my friends, were afraid of me in college and all of that. But in our own home, we were afraid of everything. My parents would whisper in their own beds. Because they're scared that even their bedroom is tapped. I would be interrupted by phone calls, as I'm talking with a friend, and the palace would call and say, hang up, the president was your father. Every aspect of us was bugged, and every aspect of us was fear. And there were rules to engagements with him. My mother used to tell me, smile when he smiles and cry when he cries, and never look him in the eyes, because he will know how to read the eyes. And I grew up with my mother trying to commit suicide because of that fear, because of that, suffocation that we were living in. My mother used to shake me as a teenager. It's like, you've got to be strong. You've got to be independent. You cannot cry. You've got to leave the country, And it's sort of, and I was a teenager. I was like, I don't know why you're yelling at me. I haven't done anything wrong. And I understood later that what she was trying to do is sort of embedded in me. It's almost like tattooing it in my DNA, that you've got to be strong. And the way I got out of Iraq was because of Saddam. I got into an arranged marriage just to get me out of Iraq, and I was very confused. How could you do this to me? So he changed my life to a great extent. Mostly it made me aware of the treatments of women. It's how, a lot of people, including me, would tell you, actually, a lot of the laws during Saddam Hussein were much better right now than they are now. A lot of the laws under the Mubarak regime of Egypt, the Ben Ali regime of Tunisia, and they were dictators by every definition of the word. And the laws vis-a-vis women were better than they are right now. And it's not a defense of these systems, but it is telling us, but they were better laws, right? So we have to reconsolidate the fact that, yes, these guys also manipulated the women's issues in a very interesting way. So I would see Saddam doing what he did to women on a very intimate level. He had a day of the people, where he raped women as much as he wanted, those who wanted to ask him for help. But he also introduced great laws, for some not great, but decent laws towards women.
Can you talk to us about how you got involved in Women for Women, how you started it, and what inspired it?
Well, so I came to America as with an arranged marriage, which I was very which was horrible, horrible, awful. It lasted for 3 months. I left, and Iraq invaded Kuwait during that same time. So I saw myself suddenly with no family in here, with $400 in my pockets, and with my country in war, and I could not even call my family to tell them help. But I stayed here and I started my life from zero, really. I moved from like being the daughter of Saddam Hussein's pilot and the elite of Iraq to a very vulnerable person alone with abuse out of an abusive marriage, no money, nothing, not even working permit. I went to the INS saying, you tell me what to do because I need to survive in here. And within 2 years, I got myself back to college because I could not transfer my university years in Iraq. I re-enrolled in college while I was here, I was learning about, I learned 2 facts in 1 month. And 1 fact was about the Holocaust. I did not know about it. But the same month, by happenstance, there was a coverage of the Bosnia War and of a concentration camp and rape camps in Bosnia on the front page of Times and Newsweek magazines. And I remember just putting it together. I was 23 years old at the time, and I was like, but they said never again. And it's exactly the same picture. Whatever, it was 40 years later, but it's happening again, and 50 years ago, I was like, I don't understand, but didn't we say that? I still have this curiosity. I call it a childlike curiosity. I was like, why would you need that, And so I wanted to, at that time, I called around different organizations. There were no websites, there were no internets at that time. Oh, there was, but not public. 1993, there were yellow pages, Really, I don't know if the young people understand that, in here, but I mean, there were yellow pages. I called, here's the women's organizations, and I asked if they're doing anything for Bosnia. And they're like, no, come after 6 months. And I'm like, 6 months? They are rape camps. That's where, for me, I was like, well, I have to do something about it. And so it was really no experience, no work experience, no American experience. I had just been in the country for, less than 3 years. Newlywed to another, now this time my choice, another man, going back to college. I was like, but we have to do something about it. And that's how Women for Women started, really. I was at Denny's midnight eating French fries, my favorite. And truly, I love it. Usually, I stop myself with fries after a speech, so... And I was like, well, why don't we just do the sponsorship program? And that's how it started. And it's still running. It's a sponsorship program that asks for every single woman and eventually every single man to sponsor a woman, a survivor of war, who is in her context. We don't need to bring everyone in here. But in her context, she needs to survive, So give her cash and we'll give her training, So it's about sponsoring her for $30 a month and exchange pictures and letters with her. In the meantime, we'll make sure that she's getting vocational skills training so she can get a job. We're teaching her about women's rights and about position in the society and the economy so we can build her self-esteem and self-confidence. And after a year of your sponsorship, we'll help her graduate and place her in a job or help her get an income, whether microcredit loans or whether it is a formal placement. And the reason for that is because people in war still have to work. That's what everyone forgets. I don't understand. Syria right now, we're talking about war and war and war and war and this bombing and that bombing and this rubble. But people in Syria still have to earn living so they can eat. It's as simple as that. And we have to address that very practical reality. Even when we send aid to people, we send mostly, conflict resolutions and, democracy training, which all valid. But at the end of the day, people need to get jobs and work and earn a living and eat. And that's the very practical need. So if you haven't noticed yet, I'm very practical. We've got to address people's needs in a very real way. Because if we do not address it, others are addressing it. And the others are the fundamentalists indeed. As long as there is an injustice in this world, as long as there is misery in the world, there will always be people who will take advantage of that. And there will always be extremists, whether it is religious or whether it is military or whether it is fascist or whether it is whatever. As long as there is misery in the world, there will always be extremists who will take care of it. And that makes it upon every single one of us to address that misery.
Mm-hmm. What do you think that we here in the United States can do for the women in Syria in terms of helping? Or
this is a very pivotal time in the Middle East. We can, we cannot talk about wanting the Middle East or criticize the Middle East from afar, wanting democracy and stability and all of these things if we're not going to invest. And I am talking about very practical way. There needs to be an investment in all the moderate voices, and women are the most moderate voices. Women are actually the only hope in the Middle East, and I have a complete faith that the only way out of this crisis in the Middle East is to invest in women and empower women. But when we look at the investment in women vis-a-vis, or the moderate voices vis-a-vis the investment the Islamist regimes, I guess, are getting, is minuscule. We're talking about the differences of millions of dollars that are consistently being poured to fundamentalist groups, to Syria included, as opposed to much more mediocre support to the modernists and to women's issues. So that's one thing. So money is an important factor in this dynamic. The second one is we cannot, and this is something that I was really caught up a few years ago in Sudan, when I was visiting Sudan and met with government officials, and I was like, where are the women? You've got to invest in women, and the official just like, just stop it here, just stop it. Unless the US delegations and the UN delegations and the European delegations also come with 50% of their delegation are women, do not lecture us about what we need to do, because you guys are not doing that. And so, very good point. And a point that silenced me, to be honest, good point, right? So if we are to talk about Muslim women having to get better roles and all of these things, we've got to push for that debate. You cannot meet with business people in the Middle East if you don't ask, where are the women? You cannot make investment if you don't ask where that push makes a difference in there.
As long as you have this singular interpretation of Islamic teachings that puts women down, is it possible for women to get into the corporate space, the media space, the marketplace space, and be successful?
A wise man once told me that what the Muslim world is going through, or particularly the Middle East, because actually majority of Muslims are in Malaysia and in Indonesia, where they're doing much better. So, but particularly in the Middle East, it's just simply going through the dark ages. These statements that made me like, okay, I understand what's going on historically. Now, in Europe's dark ages, I just read that about 5 million women were killed in that era. Of just the witch hunting and all the inquisitions and all of these things, whatever. Now, horrible history that, thank God, we're out of it. And I am optimistic that we will get out of it. Otherwise, I would not have changed my life and do everything for the Middle East, for that. It is about what religion? Whose religion? My mother, I'm a Muslim. And my mother, growing up, told me the best prayer you can do every single day. And she never taught me how to pray the Muslim way. I had to teach myself out of rebellion against my parents, who were very secular. So I had a reverse story in here. But she told me the best prayer you can do is to smile every day and thank God. And it's beautiful. I mean, it's just so beautiful. And she said, God is everywhere. Is in the trees, is in the sand, is in the sky, is in the air, is everywhere. And all what you need to do is just smile and thank everything that is around you. And that's Islam for me. That is honestly the Islam I grew up with. Now, Osama bin Laden said something very different. It is Islam out of fear as opposed to out of love. It is fear, and that's the narrative right now in the Middle East. That is the narrative. How do you change the narrative of the religion? Now, when it comes to women, how do you change it? Then you revive, in my opinion, you revive what is beautiful in the religion rather than fight it. One of the most prominent women in Islam is Muhammad's wife, Khadija. Khadija, which it's not a controversial story what I'm about to tell you. Everyone agrees on it. It is just a skipped story. It is just passed over very fast. Khadija was 20 years older than Muhammad. She was 42 years old woman when she fell in love and married him as a 23 years old young man. She was a very wealthy businesswoman who had her own caravans, trading caravan, and hired him to run her business for her for the caravans. They had a most beautiful marriage for 20 years. She is the only mother of his children. He never fathered any other child outside of her. And when he got the prophecy and came to her shaking, doubting that Gabriel spoke to him, she's the one who shook him and said, you have to believe this is the messenger of God. And thus she became the first believer in Islam. Now that, for me, is a role model for Muslim women. She's educated. She's a businesswoman. She made her choices. Boy, if a woman right now in New York City marries someone who's 20 years younger than her, it will be the gossip of every newspaper, you know? But imagine, this was 1400 years ago, you know? So for me, I look at her and it's like, we need to revive Khadija's narrative. What people know about Muhammad is after she died, he got depressed for 6 months. Islam was reviving, was sort of spreading at that time, and that's when the multiple marriages were introduced as a political strategy. Marry, you know, in order for the tribe to give you their allegiance, they married their daughter. And so he is known for the second half of his life than the first half of the, what I care about Khadija. So how can we revive and celebrate rather than fight? It's almost like sacrilegious when I'm in the Middle East and I say, I love God, you know, and they're like, really? I was like, yeah, but I think that's the way to God. It's through love. It's not through fear, you know, it is through beauty. It's not through ugliness. That's my Islam. God is everywhere. And the best prayer I can do is thank and smile.
I'm having trouble, like, I don't know, I guess identifying the link between economic development and opportunities for women without also the opportunity to control their families. And what?
They have.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, in the current climate, I guess.
Sex is sex, no matter where you are in the world.
Right.
They have. The perceptions, you know, there's a Talmudic saying that says we see things as we are, we do not see things as they are. Don't take them wrong. Just because they're wearing the headscarf and the abaya does not mean that they don't have access to family control and all of these things they have. It doesn't, you know, it's the reason they're having a lot of children is not because of lack of family planning. It is because of society has not changed its perception. So I'm writing a book, for example, right now on an Iraqi woman who used to work in my family home, and she's my age, you know, so she used to be a child servant, basically, in my family's home. And I grew up with her, and we became very good friends, and she went to school, and then eventually, you know, she ended up, you know, she started as the maid, but, you know, towards the end, she had her formal job at the airport as a receptionist, but living in our family as a family member, so there's an evolution. And I don't see her for 20 years, and I don't know where she is for 20 years, and I end up, by complete happenstance, meeting her through, she becomes a woman and a member of Women for Women, and I end up meeting her. So, and I'm writing a book now on that subject. It's a magical story. But this is a woman that I know, but very, very poor, and her husband got killed, and I don't want to tell you the story, but basically she's very marginal. So anyway, I go and spend time with her. It's like, she has 6 children. I'm like, 6 children? What are you doing? How could you like even fathom 6 children? You're poor, you know? And she's like, I was like, why? And it was, well, I got girls, and I was afraid if I don't get a boy, my husband will marry someone else. And I'm like, you grew up with me, like, how could you even think this way? And she says, I know, I did not think this way when I was with you. But then I came, and it's a different society, and it's a different neighborhood, and everyone is scaring me right and left. If you don't have a son, if you don't have a son, if you don't have a son, he will divorce you, he'll divorce you, until it becomes real, until it becomes in my head, I have to have a son, I have to have a son, I have to. So she has 4 girls before she has the 5th and the 6th who are sons. So they're not, or for example, she marries her teenage children. 16 years old, she marries her girls. And again, this, I was like, what, are you crazy? How could you marry 6? They are kids. And she's like, no, I had no money. Her husband got killed in the war. I had no money. I could not feed them. So, and I need to send them to college. And I had to make a choice between, you know, sending them to college and marrying them. So she cut a deal with every husband. I marry her as 16 years old, and in exchange we send her to college. And her deal worked out, indeed. And I'm against child marriage, against it, and still horrified. So the teenage girls get married, indeed, went to business school, pharmacy school, and nursing. Indeed, but they each had a child immediately, and I'm like, why? And they said, because we need to prove our fertility. Or one woman, I was there, and she's covered head to toe with gloves, which means very religious. And I was scared of her because it's like, seriously, this is serious religious, you know. And my car was not there, my driver was not there. She said, do you want a ride? And I was like, yeah, I would appreciate it. And she comes with her 4-wheel drives, you know, and she comes and she's like, zzz, you know, and I was like, so she sees me very surprised. And this is a very religious province in the south of Iraq. So she sees me surprised and she looks at me and she said, oh, honey, this is just a facade, so they leave me alone. You know, and she ended up being a women's rights lawyer. She represents marginalized women, prostitutes in the courts, you know. And she said, I need to do this so they can leave me alone, so they don't criticize me. So just because they're doing this, it doesn't mean anything, actually. It's just they're making decisions on what gives them access to go on, you know. And so, but it's a different culture. It's just a different navigation. That doesn't mean it's easy. It's very challenging. They have to go through mountains and deserts and hills and rivers to actually make it. It's not, the route is not an easy one, but it's not lack of accessibilities or even knowledge about it. It's lack of courage to say, I don't care what the neighbors say, I am not having another child, which many of us don't have.
Thank you so much.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.